So a little over 2 months ago I filmed the definitive Handtrap guide, which of course was definitive for that format and not for this format. So today I'm gonna bring you guys the definitive Handtrap guide, slightly different. Yo, what's up guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to talk about a very cool and interesting subject that everyone in the game likes, which are Handtraps. Are there too much, are there too few? We have no clue, there are more coming. This format is slightly different than last format. Last format was a format heavily dominated by combo decks. We had Dragon Link, we had Infernoble, I'm already forgetting these cards, and it was quite a difficult format to play. Because these decks were both very powerful and basically an instant win if you went first, people had to main Handtraps again. We saw the uprise from like 12 to maybe even more Handtraps per deck to only have a fighting chance against these decks, which was pretty insane. But of course then the Banlist hit and all the combo decks were thrown out of the window immediately, and we are in a trap format right now. Which is quite different because Nibiru doesn't really work versus trap decks. So what was good back then is very not good right now, and of course mentality has changed, players have changed, players play their decks differently, they build their decks differently, and so should you. So today I'm going to help you guys building your deck better, getting that Nibiru out of there, and talk to you a little bit about the format right now. So a little while ago the extravagance worked and I got 3rd place with Subterror, which is a very low-key humble brag, but deck building was a very big part of this event. It was kind of what are we expecting for this, because there have been no events since the Banlist, and it was overall the first event that has happened, you know, official event, next to locals of course. But it was quite interesting, you know, what am I going to do? What am I going to expect? How am I going to prepare for this event? The route that I took myself was to play a very high amount of trap decks in my, or trap cards in my deck that all have a very high impact. High impact is a word you're gonna hear a lot this video, so I hope you like that terminology. So I removed all the Handtraps that I played from the previous years, even the Ashes, the Ogres, the Trolls, the Gammas, the Pirus, all those cards, I just threw them out and I replaced them with cards like Dimensional Barrier, Dogmatica Punishment, you know, all these very heavy impact cards that basically trade or even do better versus your opponent's decks. Now the mentality behind it is that I wanted to play as few Handtraps as possible. Of course Venus is still a Handtrap, which is, you know, kind of sad, because I didn't want to play into a brand new card called Triple Tactic Talent. Because what I noticed during testing playtesting against some who was maining the card in basically every deck, is it was quite difficult to actually win, because even if you did a high impact card like Gamma, destroying their monster and depleting their resources a little bit, they can just talents and they just draw more cards, or they look at your hand and shuffle something back, and every time I did a Handtrap I basically felt punished, which is exactly how talents should work. But I literally felt like, why would I even play Handtraps in this format? Because, you know, what is this? I'm just gonna lose because I just ashed or something. So yeah, personally I would, you know, kind of transfer that mentality to every deck that I would be playing right now. I don't really think this is a good format for Handtraps. There are certain Handtraps that are good and I'm going to talk about them in a little bit. But there are way more that are just not that good right now. So even for main or side deck, there is a lot of work to be done. So one of the key points of this format is heavy impact cards. You want to trade your cards, you know, as good as possible. The reason why a card like Dogmatica Punishment is really good is because you destroy both their monster and you destroy another card within this. So you trade 2 cards for your 1 card, which is quite insane already. And most Handtraps just don't do that. If you ash their Alistair, for example, they don't have Invocation, but they can still link away for Almirage and then for the Secure Garda, then they can activate Dogmatica or the other servant, then they summon Ecclesia and you are still behind on resources compared to your opponent. So that of course really raises the problem, is what cards should we play and what cards shouldn't we play, because you cannot wait with the Ash on the Dogmatica card, because then they just have Mekaba, and if you Ash the Alistair they can just still play, which is kind of the introduction of, you know, the entire Handtrap, you know, debacle right now. Because I've seen a lot of players just cutting out their Handtraps entirely, or just maining a lot less. Well, there are a couple that you should definitely take a look at. One of the cards that is still high impact right now is one of the best Handtraps, is still Ash. This is still the most versatile Handtrap, even though my example from a couple of seconds ago wasn't, you know, in its favor. But Ash is still really good. Still being able to negate a card like Nadir Servant is quite insane. Stopping that Alistair also is still quite insane. But if you do it against a virtual world Lulu, that can stop their turn as well. It's not maybe stopping their turn all the time, but it might just be exactly what you needed. And if you see how versatile it is versus like almost every deck at the moment, a card like Ash is actually pretty viable to still play. Which is quite nice because it has a lot of applications against loads of decks. For example, Eldnick, Dogmatica, Invoked, even Subterror, even Virtual World. So yeah, it's all looking kind of good for Ash. Now another card that is really good this format is Ghost Bell. Ghost Bell can negate effects that do something or move something from the graveyard, like especially summon a card from the grave or add a card from the grave, which might not seem good in the first place, but it stops a lot of cards. First of all, it stops Invocation because it banishes cards from the graveyard. Of course, it doesn't do that when Meltdown is on the field, just an example. But it does really work against a lot of decks. Like for example, the Lau works against really good, it works against Hadir Servant. So that's one of the cards that definitely is interesting to see. It also works against Eldlick. So yeah, interesting. So another card that negates stuff in the graveyard is Skullmeister, which has been seeing a lot of play recently, which is quite insane because we have not seen this card for quite a while. It's a very old card, all the way from Star Strike Blast, I believe. One of the best sets out there. And this card can negate anything that activates in the grave. So this negates Invocation, this negates any Eldritch card in the graveyard, this negates the Virtual World card, which is also quite impactful. This is another card that people have been playing over the couple of weeks. Pretty interesting card. I don't personally think it's that impactful enough. For example, against the Virtual World, it doesn't stop all their, monster plays, it only stops the spell or traps, which is okay at best. So definitely a card to think of, but I'm not sure if this is the correct impact. Now the third graveyard interaction, because apparently graveyard interactions are really, really good, is DD Crow. DD Crow is a very strong card versus, again, Eldritch, which if you are, playing against that deck a lot, it's really good. It's good against It's not as good against the Virtual World deck, because if you just DD Crow their spell, they will just send another spell and then use that. But it still has the applications there. There are many decks that DD Crow is good against. Now, of course, all these three cards really play into the talents, and they aren't really that amazing against trap decks. The thing with trap decks is, though, that they mostly activate like the card generation, like Extravagance or Duality, and a card like Ash is really good against those cards, so that's pretty nice. But the Bell, Skullmeister, DD Crow, they all suck against the back row decks. So if you want to play these cards, it's really dependent on, how the format at your local is, how is your testing group, do you really want to play these cards? Or you're playing against Eldritch, then it's probably fine to play all these cards. If you're playing a lot against trap decks or other rogue decks, then maybe these aren't the best for you guys. These are cards that are very good against meta decks right now. But not everybody plays the meta decks. I forgot to say that all the graveyard interaction is also pretty insane versus the Dryad deck, because DD Crow can just get bent and out of there, and Bell can negate almost all of them, and Skullmeister can negate almost all of them in the grave as well, which is pretty insane. And there are two other hand traps that I really wanted to talk about that are very, very strong in this format. One of them is Drone Lockbird, and the other one is Artifact Lancia. Both cards are very similar, that you discard them in your opponent's turn, and they stop a mechanic from working. DD or Drone Lockbird cannot, neither player can add cards from their deck to their hand, which is pretty game-winning versus any Invoke deck. And the Lancia stops your opponent from banishing, which is pretty insane against the Invoke deck. Why does Invoke die to every Handtrap? Draw is very good in the Dryadron matchup as well. Lancia is very good in the Virtual World matchup and the Eldritch matchup. So both these cards are still very insane, definitely side deck worthy. I wouldn't really main them if I were you, because it's really matchup dependent. But I myself have 3 Draw and 3 Lancia in my side deck at all times, because it just stops those decks from playing at all, which is always nice to win because your opponent just cannot play. And yeah, so those are a couple of the options right now. So let's talk about a couple of the options that are not so good right now. So Nibiru is a very strong card, for example, versus the Dryadron deck, but even then they can still just play afterwards, because their boss monster negates, so Nibiru won't stop that, so you need to stop them before their boss monster, and I don't think that's impactful enough. Then versus the Eldritch deck, it's just not good. They are very slow at the moment. Mekaba Invoked deck also negates it. And if you play against Virtual World, a good Virtual World player would just play around it, and then they still end on a VFD, which is still pretty, insane. So that card really isn't that good right now. A card like Gamma, which was very popular last format, is also kind of, getting less good Because again, Virtual World, it's not as high impact. You stop one monster, but they still have 5 more. It's just kind of difficult. Against a deck like Triatron, you're not gonna do enough because these monsters revive themselves from the grave or activate in the graveyard again anyway. Of course, they're all once per turn, but it's just not as impactful to just negate one, because the moment that they tribute to Benton, you're already 2 effects behind. So it's really difficult to time that Gamma at a point where it's actually very impactful. And it's not that good versus trap decks, basically. And a lot of people have also learned to just not play like into Gamma anymore, so they just wait with their Ash until you have a monster on your field. It is really interesting to see 2 of the best Handtraps out there just fall down in relevancy so quick with just 1 Banlist, because combo decks are just kind of gone right now, and they're really matchup dependent. So then, what should your side deck really be looking like? So, Droll and Lockbird is definitely one of the most mandatory cards out there. Lancia is kind of dependent on what are you expecting to play against, because Lancia can be really strong versus decks, but it can also be very bad against other decks. Something that I like to do right now is kind of a deck building tip. Is I basically main triple Cyclone in every deck, because it's basically good against everything, even against Triatron it has its applications, because they're a ritual spell. They only play it once. If you banish it, it cannot get added back, so they cannot ritual summon anymore. So definitely just 3 Cosmic Cyclone in the main. Then for the side deck, I think evenly matched is really, really good this format. Even if you get VFD'd, you can still evenly there, traps back row away or other monsters. It's pretty nice. Forbidden Droplet is very insane versus VFD versus the Drytime matchup. Kind of deck dependent though. So otherwise something like Forbidden Chalice could maybe even do the trick to get that Vanity's ruler out of the way, or to stop that 1 VFD from happening. Maybe more back row cards. Lightning Storm is very good this format. Of course, I just named like 20 extremely, expensive cards. Another card that I really like this format is Anti-Spell Fragrance, because all deck play a lot of spells. Virtual World plays a lot of spells, and it can definitely just hinder them or stop them completely, which is something that I didn't expect. Drytron is a ritual deck, Invoked is a fusion deck, so what else do I really need to say for the anti-spell argument? But yeah, one of the most important tips to get out of this video is definitely look at what the people around you are playing, what kind of tournament are you participating. Are you participating in a like 100 attendee event? Then definitely get ready for meta decks. If you're playing against your local player base, you probably know what they are playing anyway, so you probably don't even need to side. And if you do, be sure not to just put in the bureau random times, because I don't really think that's good right now. So that's kind of how I look at the format right now. Handtraps just aren't that strong again. There are very strong options still, but it's just all not very good enough, it seems like. The Nibiru was very broken a couple of formats ago, but right now it's kind of not that good again. So yeah, let me know in the comment section down below what you think on this situation. And yeah, be sure to check out the next video. Bye guys, see you there.